Hi, folks. My name is Scott, and I'm the middle school pastor at Lighthouse Christian Center. And I want to take some time today to share just some ideas of how to how to have healthy boundaries and healthy relationship with technology and screens, especially during this time of a worldwide pandemic. Let's face it, right now everything's on a screen. Work is on a screen. Church is on a screen. Schoolwork for kids in school on a screen. Entertainment on a screen. I love to cook. I don't open up a cookbook. I grab my screen and scroll and find a recipe. And so everything's on a screen, especially now. And again, like I said, we're in this kind of strange time of history where most of the world, and especially here in the United States, we're under stay-at-home orders or shelter-in-place orders, kind of keeping us at home. And so even community is through a screen. And so during this time, especially, we do need to take a little bit of a deep breath and just recognize there's going to be some things that are out of balance. Now, that doesn't mean we just throw our hands up in the air and just say, "Oh well." Again, there's still healthy ways to do that and interact with that. Some days will be better, some days will be harder, but we have to allow ourselves some of that kind of back and forth and just some of that tension that you feel, that I feel. For those of you that don't know, I've been married for almost 25 years. I've got an 18-year-old who's going to graduate this spring, and I've got a almost 15-year-old who's finishing up his ninth grade year. So we've been living with this whole tension of screens and technology for many years, but especially now in this time, it is difficult. But there is some pieces that, again, can help us have healthy boundaries and a healthy interaction with our screens. And so let's just take a few minutes. I'm going to try and keep this somewhat brief, shorter than probably what we'd have in person, but let's kind of buckle on and buckle up and kind of go for it. So the first thing that building healthy boundaries and relationships, it starts with us as the adults, whether we're married and have a spouse, whether we're single, it still starts with us. I have to be the one setting the example. I've got to be the one having conversations with my spouse and how do we do this and things like that. So am I willing to set down my phone? Am I willing to have conversations about putting limits on how much time I have with technology? Am I willing to do those things? If the answer is no, then we're going to feel some tension in that. Most of us are willing to go, okay, let's have those conversations. Now, we have to recognize, though, restrictions that I have are going to be different than restrictions, a 5-year-old has or even a 15-year-old has. They're going to be different. There's going to be different allowances. That's just part of life. But again, it still starts with me. And in that, again, am I willing to have conversations with my spouse and say, okay, what's healthy, what's not? Now, again, I've got to start with the idea of conversations. Conversations like this or like this don't go very far. Conversations at peacetime are usually when you get good dialogue, and usually it starts with me. So if I'm struggling with something, and I'm going to talk to my spouse or even my kids, I'm going to say, kiddos, or hun, I recognize I've kind of been letting my screens really take control of my time, and maybe that's something we're all struggling with, but I know I'm struggling with it, and I know I want to set up some boundaries. It might be even a good idea for us to start setting up some boundaries, and kind of start there. Now, again, if you got younger kids, that's a different different situation. If you got those older elementary kids, middle school, high school spouses, that's where you start the conversation and it starts a conversation. Again, this and this don't accomplish anything, but it starts with me. It starts with us as the adults. The second part in this is understanding healthy boundaries and relationships is it starts offline. And it starts young. Now, if you've got older kids, That doesn't mean you don't have these conversations, but the big challenge with technology and spending time with it is it begins to begin to question kind of our self-worth, our self-identity, our image issues, and things of that nature. And so those conversations start really young, um, recognizing real life versus screen life, or just image life, and those things can happen again offline, when they're young. Recognizing that, gosh, you're beautiful. God made you unique. God made you you. Those kind of conversations start young, and again off screen, so that when they do enter into technology world, into apps and things of that nature, they have a better sense of who they are, what they stand for, what they believe, and things like that. But it starts young. Again, even if you have older kids, you still have those conversations, but it's better if you can start them young, having those. But again, there's some technology talk that has nothing to do with technology. It has to do with our inner soul, and who we are, and who God created us to be. Those things happen. Another area that I want to encourage adults and parents is put yourself in your kids' shoes. Now, again, toddler and younger, not so much, but once you start getting into elementary school and middle school and high school, put yourselves in your kids' shoes before starting the conversation with them. What would they be, if by limiting some things, what are they giving up? What are they going to lose? What will they do with their time? And the more we can do that, the better we can kind of understand maybe where the conversation would go and things like that. The reason I say that is because, again, community is different. Now, especially right now, nobody's in school and things like that. But when we get back to school, we have to recognize, like, our kids' best friends may not be at school, so they may not be seeing them every day. Their best friends may not even be going to church with them, and so how are they going to spend time with their kid? And so if we say, well, no technology, that means no time with their friends, and for especially little kids, that's a big deal. So again, put yourselves in their shoes. Now, again, it might be just entertainment. It might be an escape. But the better you can try and understand that, the better, for you to be a student of your student, to understand maybe where they're going to be coming from will help guide conversations in this. Again, if you recognize, gosh, my kid just is not wanting to do anything, no responsibility, maybe because they're afraid of failure, and so they don't want to. They're afraid to help around the house because there's no chores, or there's not a chore chart, or not specifically told what to do or how to do it. And so maybe they're just, I'm going to go into this because it's something I can control. And so, but the more we can begin to think about that and put ourselves in their place, the better, again, we can go into those conversations. Which leads me to kind of the last one in helping to create healthy boundaries and healthy interactions is bring our kids into the conversation. Again, conversation, not the shouting match, not the demanding, but into the conversation. It's amazing how sometimes when just by sharing our heart and our struggle, it allows especially again, our older kids to begin to share in theirs as well. We'll find that a lot of times kids have kind of harsher restrictions than we would. Now, granted, there are always those kids that are like, I would play video games 24 hours a day and then maybe sleep an hour the next day and then play for 23 more hours. There's always those kind. We also recognize, eventually they get tired of it as well and kind of come back. The large majority, and really here is, there's always going to be pushback. But again, if we bring kids into the conversation, that allows them to feel like they're, again, being heard, something we like to feel as well. We like to feel heard, and so do our kids. And so bring them into the conversation, help them to understand the whys and things of that nature. And so that's just a kind of a real brief interaction of just basics of setting up some healthy boundaries and healthy interactions with technology. Ultimately, it comes down to conversation. Are we willing to have conversations with those involved? Again, toddler and younger, it's a little harder. We can why them to death. But as they get older, again, conversation huge in this. So without going, because again, nobody wants to watch an hour video here. So I am trying to keep this very brief. And so I want to get into some specific questions that will unpack a little bit how now we interact with technology and screens. And so one of the first questions on here is like, how do we balance it? How do we create good balance? And ultimately, most parents don't like this answer, is each home is different. There are some homes that tend to lean a little bit more away from technology, and then there's some families that lean a little bit more to being okay with more time with technology. Either one works as long as it works for your family. As long as you do feel you're still having some interaction, you're having good conversations, you're having some good heart-to-hearts. Each family has to find what that balance is. What works for my family may not work for your family, and what works for you may not work for me, and it goes out from there. So finding the rhythms and finding the balance is up to each individual home. Now, here's what I want to just encourage us. In this world, it seems like everything's polarized. Politics, polarized. Religion, polarized. Vaccinations, polarized. Healthcare, polarized. Everything's polarized. Same thing with technology and how we as homes deal with it. Everything's polarized. You're either totally for it or you're totally against it. And I believe strongly that the tension in the middle is where faith comes alive. It allows us to ask tough questions and interact and not really quite sure. And so as each family finds that balance, recognize that it's a constant moving balance thing, because what works this year might not work next year, because kids' schedules are different, kids' interactions are different, kids' likes are different, and things of that nature. And a great example, my son has blossomed with music, and so he's suddenly spending more time on screens looking at songs to write, or how to write songs, how to record music, and then if he's going to record music, that's on a screen, but that's really good stuff. So do I limit those kind of things? So every season changes, and you always have to be in this flux, which for parents doesn't feel like we're being successful, but that's where again the tension lies and where faith comes alive. So that's just one thing. And again, how to do it, each family's kind of on their own on that one a little bit. But again, conversations. I love what one person put is like, hey, my husband likes video games. I love my TV shows. I love Facebook. Like, that's a great place to start. Just saying, hey guys, we like this stuff. And so, but we also, and again, that's where the conversation, bringing the kids in, we recognize we need to set a good example for you, but recognizing what your place is, where your starting place is, and go from there. Now, there's a number of people that have kind of talked about, how do I protect my kids online? Now, there's a gazillion videos and some really good videos on some how-tos. I'm just going to explain them briefly, but I'm going to let you kind of find those. I'll try to put some links into this video on this, but there's some great ones out there. Pretty much every device has parental controls. Use those. So in my family, I put parent controls on my kids' phones. I put it on our Netflix. I put it on Hulu, and I put it on everything. I've kind of put parent kind of boundaries on. And so like for my kids, they don't have access to explicit music. I turn that piece off. Now, again, that shuts off a lot of music, but there's still millions of good songs out there. Especially as they were younger, I limited, within phones, you can parent restrict books that are available. TV shows, movies that are available, and things like that. Even websites can be restricted. Now, here's one of the things that I really like. I know this happens in Apple world, but I'm assuming also in Android world, is protecting kids from websites and things of that nature. Within the parent settings, you can put what websites to limit now, or to block. Now, what I like nowadays is the the operating system recognizes it's these types of sites that it doesn't like, and it starts blocking most of them, if not all of them. And so this is going to sound weird, but I sat next to my wife and I said, honey, I'm going to get a list of the top 10 porn sites. And I just want the list. I'm not going to be going to the sites. I just need the list and the name. So I was able to type those URLs into everybody's phone. My phone, the kid's phone, my wife's phone. I just typed in those 10 websites. And then the operating system began to recognize and block out the other sites like that. We even tested it out. And so at the time, my son was pretty young. And so we were trying to misspell like naked woman or naked girl, boobs. We were trying to do it and to see what would come up. And to be honest, it did really good. It's a free way to do some protecting. But again, parental controls, you set the code for that. Don't let your kids know the code. And that does a really good. Now, there are some pieces like Covenant Eyes and some other different softwares that you can put on home computers and phones and things of that nature that begin to limit that. But again, parental controls are good. Now, when it comes to this, I tend to err on, well, sometimes I come across very strict, and in other areas I tend to come across fairly liberal. There are ratings on things like music, video games, movies. I tend to try and follow those. So a PG-13 movie, my 10-year-old may not watch. My 7-year-old probably won't. Now, here's where it gets really tricky. Marvel movies, which are advertised to young kids with Legos and Hot Wheels and video games and things like that, are usually PG-13 movies, but yet 7 and 8-year-olds want to see it and things like that. We actually held off on movies for many years. Now, we let them begin to see some of them before they were 13 or some things like that. But, our movies are blocked in our home, except if you have a code. And so TV MA blocked in our home unless you have a code. And so those are just some things that we did to protect. Again, parental controls are free and for the most part work very well. Perfect? No. Very well? Yes. And again, if you want to take that next step, you can get like a Covenant Eyes, or again, there's many different versions that are typically paid to block more. Or and in that protection was there were some other questions that kind of had to do with, well, how can I monitor that? Well, I know in like the iPhones and the Apple world, and I believe this is the same thing within Android world, and is what I did is we tried to just have one account. So we have one YouTube account that everybody's logged into. So it's on the TV, it's on the PlayStation, it's on everybody's phone. So if they were on YouTube and they're looking at inappropriate things, YouTube will begin to recommend us videos. And if it's starting to get really kind of funky, I know somebody's watching something and I can begin some conversation. The other thing that Apple does, that was YouTube, but Apple does, I have an account, and then you're able to create a child account. And when doing that, again, I have access, so I can see usage time. I can see what the apps that they're using, how long they're using those, and I can set restrictions on those as well. And so, again, what we did is we kind of set some boundaries up, and then we began to have the conversations. Okay, you want time on Instagram. How much time do you think? And my daughter would be like, well, I'd like an hour on Instagram. And then I'd like an hour on this, and I'd like an hour on that. And what we did is we added that up, and we're like, that's 8 hours of screen time. And that's not, from a parent standpoint, that's not okay. And she was even able to kind of go, right, our son, same thing, go, oh yeah, that's too much. So we began to pare things down. Like, okay, so it started like she had 15 or 20 minutes on Instagram, and then she had, gave her like 20 minutes on YouTube, and so we began to pare down again with the restrictions, the parental controls. But again, because of how it got set up, I was able to monitor that without being too invasive into their world. I didn't necessarily want to do that. But again, it's my phone. I paid for it. So they know that I can say, hey, I just want to check over your phone, and I can look as much as I want and as deep as I want. I can look at conversations. Now, again, I tend to take a kind of a more of a passive role, not necessarily passive, that's not the right word, but if their phones nowadays, because since they're older, if their phone's laying around, I'll kind of look through it and I snoop through it, just see the conversations that they're having and things like that. I don't go walking in the room, I need to see your phone. Now, if that works, if that's what you do as a family, fine, if that works. But that's not the route I chose. I chose to be able to, again, have a better interaction. Again, now another thing I can do, because I'll back up their phones, I'll use that time to kind of just look and see how's it going, what's going on, things like that, just to kind of get, again, an idea. So that just gives you a couple ideas of protecting and then monitoring. Now, there's one, are there any apps that I would, that I'm kind of against, or that I warn parents or kids not to get? Ultimately, technology, again, it's not good or bad. It's amoral. It's in between. It's what we do with it. So every app can be used for good, and pretty much every app can be used for bad. There are some that are designed to look like a calculator or look like just a regular game, but when you tap on it, it takes you to a porn site or things like that. There's too many of those to really say this one, this one, this one, this one. But you have to be mindful and wary of those things. Now, again, with mine, because of parental, they have to get permission from me to download an app. Again, it started with conversation. When my kids would request an app, I would start the conversation. So why do you want this one? They would dialogue, and then we'd either decide yes or no. We'd look at the ratings and things like that. And so they began to understand what I was going to be asking. And now as they've gotten older, they've been able to monitor some of that themselves. Like, oh, that one, it's got some good ratings, but really bad ratings, and things like that. Or kids didn't like the ads or things like that. And so there is one app that I've been very hesitant against, and that's Snapchat. Again, there's a lot of great things, a lot of great filters and communication that can be had. For me, that one it solely was created because a group of guys wanted to collect as many many images, and typically inappropriate images, of people. And so they designed like, hey, let's create an app that people would take a picture, they think it would disappear, but again, it stays on our servers, and then we create a server that understands we're trying to get these types of pictures, and then we can sell those to pornographic sites. I mean, that was the sole idea of Snapchat. And so I have a hard time kind of getting my head back around that. I know that's kind of out of the system now for the most part, but I still have a hard time going over that. Now, we can say that about Facebook. I mean, ultimately, the roots of Facebook was, hey, let's get a campus directory of who's on campus and kind of who likes who, and you can create connections. That was different than let's collect pornography. And so close, but it is different. There is some talk of that like TikTok does some recording without us knowing and things like that. I'm not sure if I believe that yet or not, but I'm not positive. But again, for me, Snapchat was one that just kind of went over the limits. Can it still be used for good? Yes. And I recognize kids can delete text messages or delete direct messages in other platforms. But again, those are going to be things that I was going to have to wrestle with. But Snapchat was just made a little too easy for my taste. Now, age limits. Apps have age limits. Younger kids, things like a TikTok that's become very popular during this time. There's great funny ones, creative ones, all these kind of different things. But then all of a sudden you're scrolling and whap, something pretty inappropriate's there, language or just dress or things of that nature. And so those are ones you have to be really careful with. Again, when you're looking at them as an adult, how you're interacting with them and things of that nature. I'm not sure I'd allow a 10-year-old to have a TikTok. I'm not sure I'd really allow a 12-year-old to have a TikTok yet. I'm okay if you do, but I hope that's done out of conversation and not, but mom, everybody has it. Like, that doesn't help the conversation. And so those are just some areas of, again, how to, again, create some healthy boundaries and, again, give us as parents maybe some control and some guidance. Because, again, if I'm seeing, if my kids are asking, hey, can I have the password, or can you put in the password so I can watch this movie or I can watch this show? I'm like, no, we don't need to be watching that. Or my daughter just kind of innocently said, hey, this series would probably be pretty cool. And when I watched the series or watched the trailer, I was like, that's not going to be appropriate for our whole family to watch. I'm not sure it's necessarily even appropriate for you as an 18-year-old. And so but we were able to have some conversation around that. And so be the parent, be the role model, start the conversation. Don't expect the conversation to come to you, but start the conversation, and then set up some boundaries and set up some guidelines as parents. And again, kids are always going to push against them. They always will. We did as kids, they will as kids, and their kids will as. And so that's just part of it. So we take a deep breath. We freak out on the inside. And again, in this time, we loosen some of that. We recognize almost everything's on a screen. But also there's ways that we can still interact as families, go for walks, go play with our dogs. There's things that we can do to kind of get out, make sure we're seeing, not just looking at a screen here and then looking up and everything's blurry, but getting outside, going for walks, those kind of things are still necessary. But hope this is helpful. If you have any direct questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to, again, have conversations with you and help guide you if need be. If there's specific things that you're like, hey, what about this or what about that? Again, I'd be glad to just have those conversations and give some guidance and some understanding with that as well. So take care, keep at it, know that God's got you and he's watching out over you. God bless.